Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. Hello and welcome to For Your Consideration, the podcast featuring roundtable discussions re-evaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics. I'm Mike Josic.
And I'm Dustin Friesman.
Thanks for joining us. So I guess welcome to what is now week 3 of our October Fright Fest.
For the last 2 weeks and for the next 3, we'll be looking at horror franchises that have spawned upwards of 7, 8, 10 movies, the originators of those franchises, and the remakes that inevitably came along.
Actually, to be fair, the 5th week of October, which I believe falls on October 30th, we will be doing kind of Mike and Dustin's here's some movies on Netflix that would be cool for Halloween, our horror picks. So we probably won't be doing the compare and contrast there, but
we're going to call it part of the Fright Fest anyway.
Well, it is part of the Fright Fest. It's all Halloween themed. October it's all Halloween.
And fear not, next month is not all Thanksgiving, and sure as hell, December is not all Christmas. Not happening.
So, if you haven't heard the previous episodes, leading up to week 3 here, week 1 was Friday the 13th, week 2 was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Some mixed feelings about those previous films. I personally expected more and had much more of a meh reaction than I kind of expected.
I remember them being better than they were this time around. Of course, when I saw them, I was a bit of a dumber kid, so probably was just like, yay, stabbing. I'm not a psychotic, you shut up.
And for week 3, we're going to be talking about the horror classic from 1984, A Nightmare on Elm Street.
AKA the movie series that progressively got campier and campier until the inevitable remake, which was suddenly very dark and people did not like it. But was not The Evil Dead.
So, A Nightmare on Elm Street was written and directed by Wes Craven. It was released on November 9th, 1984, and has gone on to be a seminal work and a horror classic. And Dustin, what did you think of this original film?
Actually, I think that this was the best of the original films that we're looking at in these 4 weeks here. It lives up, actually. It was still a good movie to this day. The special effects were still good. The attempts at scares were still good. I say attempts because I haven't been scared by a movie since I was like 10. But the atmosphere was still creepy. Robert Englund was good as Freddy Krueger. And I actually remember more so the campier later ones. He was not a jokester in this first one.
I think a lot of people forget just how dark Freddy is in the first movie and how straight they play it. I think a lot of people also forget that Freddy is a child molester.
No, a child murderer. They said nothing about molestation in the original. Uh-oh. Now you're mixing up the remake.
But I agree with you. I think one of the things that is actually really outstanding about the first Nightmare is the fact that it does play it straight. And it's also probably why the film became a franchise.
It was definitely worthy of a franchise, worthy of sequels. And compared to all these other ones that actually had the most realistic Freddy keeps coming back mechanism, which is that he was already dead. It's not like, well, why does Jason keep getting revived? No, it's just, how do you kill somebody who's a ghost? Not happening.
Revisiting this movie, I mean, it's one of my favorite horror movies. I usually watch it at least once a year in October. I still find it creepy. I still find the storytelling solid. You mentioned the effects. I think some of the effects are a little bit clunky, but seeing as how...
Well, the long arm one is the one that I'm going to point out there as being the crappy one.
It is one of the crappier ones. Even the tongue on the phone...
Oh, yeah.
There might be one more. The mom sort of going down in the bed as she kind of gets sucked into the dream world or whatever. I mean, these are not super sophisticated effects. They're pretty good for 1984.
But they're not so jarring that it really takes you out of the experience.
And I also feel that because you're dealing with dreams, it's okay for things to have an element of unreality to them. And I almost think that it actually works in its favor.
In terms of comparing them to the other films we've done as well, it just felt better directed. The lighting felt better. The score felt better. Just everything felt like it was pieced together. Like there was something that it was actually building up and going for, as opposed to Friday the 13th, which was just, it felt pieced together. This one felt like it was a proper story that was done beginning to end.
To me, Friday the 13th felt like somebody wanted to sort of... It was very deliberate. I don't know if I'm articulating that the way I want to articulate it. It was contrived. That's probably the best word I can think about it. Friday the 13th felt very contrived to me. It didn't feel incredibly organic. It didn't really have much of a story. It was just kind of like mechanical. Here you go.
It felt like a cash-in.
Yeah, it actually kind of does. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre...
It felt very indie film almost.
It felt very organic, but it also has this... It's more of an experience and less of a story. And I feel that Nightmare is more of the full meal deal. You get a really great story... You get really great visuals.
You can enjoy it as a critic. You can enjoy it as somebody looking for just a scary movie. It's got pretty much everything going for it, the original, for sure.
Friday is like you're watching gags. You're watching tricks. It's all about the kills. Texas Chainsaw is a very visceral experience. You're supposed to just sort of take it in and think about what you just saw. This is a journey. This is a story that Wes Craven is telling you. It's very well crafted. It's very well structured. For the most part, the acting is well done. It builds nicely, and it has some twists and turns. There's the whole thing where you sort of get the sense that Tina is the main character at the beginning, because naturally the first character that you spend time with is generally the main character. But then Tina gets eliminated by Freddy, and you kind of learn that Nancy's the main character, and that continues on to the end, which was, I don't know how many times something like that had been done before then. Obviously, Wes brought that back when he came to do Scream with Kevin Williamson. But
I know it was done in Friday the 13th, actually.
The first one?
Yeah, with the girl who's going to be the cook, and that everybody forgot about immediately.
Oh, damn, that's right. That was actually one of the things that we championed about that movie.
It was one of the only things that we championed about it.
It's all starting to bleed together at this point. But really, for me, the only thing that I think was maybe even remotely weak about Craven's Nightmare was maybe the music. There were times where I thought the music was maybe a little bit too mid-'80s synth horror, but honestly, it's a weak complaint in my eye. Any criticism that I might have of the acting, Heather Langenkamp is no Meryl Streep, but I do think that they're playing these kids, and there is a naturalness to them, and I think some of that clumsiness is just kind of attributable to them being young.
One of the things that tends to annoy me about this movie, if anything, is, and we were talking about it before the recording, the parents. You're saying that they're supposed to be sort of neglectful parents, but your kids are dying, and all you're saying is, go to sleep, just don't worry about it, and then locking her in the house at the end. She's screaming for her dad, who's across the street. Takes forever to get him to come back, despite the fact that she specifically stated that she was going to be trying something and that she knows what's going on. Nobody believes any of the kids. It's almost like what I want Harry Potter or Scooby-Doo to be, where the parents are like, no, we got this covered. Don't you worry about it. Go away.
One of the big themes of this movie is the abandonment of the children, the failure of the adults. All of the adults are alcoholics or pill poppers or absent or disregard their kids. I mean, probably the most solid nuclear family in the whole group is Glenn's parents, but despite everything that's going on, they're like, oh, that crazy girl across the street, don't want her to talk to Glenn. And the dad picks up the phone and he's just like, Glenn can't come to the phone. Hangs up, takes the phone off the hook. It's that just kind of being blind to what's going on. And
yet at the same time, these parents who supposedly abandon their kids are the ones who killed Freddy in the first place. So they go very extreme from one extreme to the other.
Which is probably why they're alcoholics and pill poppers.
Yeah, you could almost see it as the parents abandoning their kids because they know the stress of having murdered someone, and now it's like, well, fuck you guys. We don't even like you anymore.
They went to that extreme to protect their children, and now they can't protect their children because they're so damaged.
They ruined their own lives, and now they've got to spread that around, I guess.
Like hot mayonnaise.
Is that what you do with hot mayonnaise?
Because we're going to be talking a bit about Jackie Earle Haley's portrayal of Freddy Krueger, I just want to point out, while we're still talking about the 84 version, Robert Englund really did something with this role. I mean, there's a reason that Freddy went from this freaky burn victim, child murderer, to one of the most popular icons of the late 80s.
Hell, he's in Mortal Kombat now.
That's right, I forgot about that. But Englund, he did something with the role where he's so menacing and so creepy. There's a little bit of humor to it.
I feel there's a lot more psychosis to it. He's more psychotic in this one.
I feel like Englund's Freddy is a genuine threat.
You don't doubt that at all.
and in the same way that John Carpenter talks about Michael Myers being a force of nature, Freddy's a force of nature here. He's unstoppable. Like, you really do get the feeling through his portrayal and through Heather Langenkamp's portrayal of Nancy, and just through the story, the direction, like the whole package. When you get to the end of the movie, I mean, I really feel like they earn that ending. I really feel like these characters worked to survive and defeat Freddy.
It was something worth fighting against. I didn't feel any fear about Jason, and Leatherface was mostly just an accident that happened. Like, he was bumbling. He was damn near bumbling. He did half of his chainsaw work was on himself.
Poor Leatherface.
Poor Leatherface.
Such a bad day.
Such a bad day. Whereas Friday the 13th, it was just slasher trope after slasher trope, none of which made sense. Just the kill happened because the kill was supposed to happen, regardless of anything that could have been set up. You were killed by the plot. The plot was the murderer there. As you said, the set pieces, it's a bunch of set pieces. You were killed by the plot. I'm sorry, there was no murderer. But here...
So the villain of Friday the 13th is now officially the plot.
But here, I was actually, since I'm revisiting it, I was expecting what I get from pretty much every single Englund performance, and that's camp. I haven't seen anything with him in it that was really serious at all that I can actually recall. And this was the most serious one. But it was definitely a good villain. That is somebody that I would certainly run the heck away from. Wouldn't want to be trying the fight. Especially when he starts like mutilating himself. Like he's messing with you. He knows what he's doing. And that's what's great about him.
I think just there's a lot of great iconography about Freddy too. I mean...
Everyone recognizes that sweater.
The sweater, the hat, the glove. I mean, when you think about Jason, started off being Mrs. Voorhees, then he just wore like a burlap sack on his head.
Then in the third one, he gets the hockey mask that we all know him for.
Yeah, it wasn't until 3 that it was like the hockey mask and the machete that rounded out the whole Jason thing. I mean, I guess Leatherface, it's hard to mistake the chainsaw, but Leatherface has a lot less style than Freddy.
He's got no real style. I will always defend that tie.
The tie?
The tie. But
he tried. He was trying.
Tried to make the place all nice for dinner.
You gotta go easy on Leatherface.
He had a bad day.
It was a very bad day.
But even so, like, you could take any piece of Freddy and people will recognize it as Freddy. You see that hat, you see Freddy. You see the shirt, you see Freddy. You see the glove, you see Freddy. You see the face, you see Freddy. There's so much to Freddy, and all of it is recognizable and independent. But then you look at the remake, which is why you brought him up in the first place, his portrayal, and you certainly disagree a little bit.
Now, just before we start on the remake, I'm just going to throw out credit here. So, Remake was directed by Samuel Bayar. The screenplay was by Wesley Strick and Eric Haserer, I think that's how you say it. And it was released on April 27th, 2010. Wide release on April 30th, 2010.
Another Michael Bay production.
Another Michael Bay production, yeah. And if I may jump in first on this one, one of the things that I actually really appreciated about this remake was all the other Michael Bay remakes that I've seen they're all so heavily color timed. I don't know, there's just something about them. They just lack any sort of naturalness to them. Whereas this one, there was like actual normal daylight. I felt like these characters...
It wasn't all darky dark.
No. And there was a definite sense of moving from certain rooms to other rooms, or inside
from one day
to outside.
To another.
Yeah. and I really appreciated that. On the flip side, the director constantly moved the camera to a degree where I think I was starting to get motion sickness after a while. Just visual flourishes that did not need to be there, just for the sake of moving the camera. I don't know if you noticed that.
I did not, actually.
Drove me nuts.
Maybe he was lacking a camera stand, and he was like, all right, instead of having it jitter, let's just keep it moving.
No, man, because like
let's just keep it going.
All the camera movements were very deliberate, like dolly movements, pans, crane shots, really elaborate crane shots, just for the sake of having the camera like move around things or swoop down, and they were all fairly subtle movements, but it was still just fast enough that I was like, okay, it's like being on a merry-go-round and watching these characters doing the things that they're doing. Now, overall, how did you feel about the remake?
I heard nothing but bad things since it came out. And I actually remember hearing an is he or is he not the killer sort of thing. And I think I misunderstood that, because there's the whole was he or was he not a child molester. And I thought that was a welcome addition. It gave them some reason to be looking him up, because once again, the parents just abandon the crap out of all the kids. They're not listening to a single thing. There's a lot bigger... I felt like it took place over a longer period of time, and that the parents... Somebody should have been doing something at some point, and it's only these teenagers who are like, you guys all suck. You're all terrible people. We got to figure this out, because we're all being killed here, and none of you even care.
I agree that Craven's Nightmare does have a much more condensed feeling to it. It does feel like it happens over a shorter period of time, and you can maybe forgive the inaction of the parents on just sort of the speed with which things are happening. Whereas, yeah,
as they're dragging Freddy out, they're investigating a murder across the street. Like it all happens like right then. It's all fairly quick. Whereas here, they're trying out all these different methods of avoiding sleep. The one kid, he had his blog that pretty much an entire week went by before it was even discovered by one of the others. I felt like...
That video blog really bothered me.
Really?
Not in like I was disturbed by it, but I just felt it was such a expository info dump. And if somebody did die, would their videos still be online, or would their family probably cancel the account or take them down? I mean, I don't know. There's something about that. I was actually wondering as the videos were playing, and I'm like, is he still going to be alive, or is he going to be dead? Because if he's still alive, it is weird.
And if he's dead, who uploaded the last video?
Touché, Dustin. Touché. And like you, I did appreciate the little bit of extra detective work. I liked maybe Freddy wasn't a child molester. Maybe the parents killed him, and this is just him getting revenge by killing all of their kids. I thought, okay, that still tracks. I mean, it's not the same as the first, but maybe they want to go in a different direction.
Nothing wrong with being slightly different.
But I did think it was a little bit weird, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, and I think you kind of found an explanation for it, but I felt it was very strange that if he was trying to lead the kids to find the evidence that would prove that the parents had killed an innocent man, I thought killing all of their friends was a really weird way to convince them that maybe he wasn't the bad guy that they thought he was.
My explanation for that, of course, was that the kids said that Freddy had done these things. Or rather Fred, because nobody calls him Freddy in this movie.
I think you only hear Freddy in the nursery rhyme. 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you.
But the kids, they said that he did these things, possibly under duress from their parents, which is something that happened in the 80s with the whole D&D, like, satanic ritual scare, and they figured out you can sort of give people false memories and all that. And that would have been a very interesting direction to take with all this. And then Freddy was upset not because the parents killed him, but because these kids who were his life sort of sold him out for no real reason. It's like, this is how you repay me sort of deal. And then he'd be killing them and sort of giving these hints as to who he is and what's going on. Not
and
necessarily.
then it all leads up to his favorite, which was Nancy.
And the reason why he'd kill them off is because he doesn't know that they don't know necessarily. Why don't these kids know? They all suppress their memories, which is a little bit dumb to an extent. But the fact that they went
How do you erase people's memories? Because this was something that had been done to the children so they wouldn't remember the things that had been done to them. So somewhere along the line, they never actually explain how they just managed to, like, memory wipe these kids.
It's called severe head trauma, okay? You just drop them on their heads a whole lot.
I can only assume that they did some sort of, like, hypnosis or something on them and were like, forget.
Luckily, we were not introduced to hypnosis like they did in The Exorcist 2, because that was terrible.
Or they might have brought Superman from Superman 2 to come and kiss every one of them and erase their memories. But then that's kind of creepy too.
But then you've got, exactly, more child molestation, and since Superman doesn't exist in this universe, obviously they killed him afterwards as well.
There's no proof of that. I also found Freddy's voice really overpowering. I thought maybe it was just my own audio setup because I didn't have the surround sound. I just had, like, the 2 stereo speakers, and you could get everything kind of mushed into that.
It definitely sounded overdubbed.
It's right up front in the sound mix. Anytime Freddy's around, it may have been kind of cool in the theater, or it might even be cool on a really good sound system where if you're in the dream, Freddy's kind of all-powering. But when you put this movie in the shadow of the 1984 original and Englund's vocal performance as Freddy, which, if you noticed, in Craven's Nightmare, Englund's voice is... I mean, it's gravelly, and he's doing the, I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy. But as the films progress, Freddy's voice gets a little bit more, like, processed, and it's a lot deeper and monstrous, whereas Englund's performance in that first movie, they don't really affect the voice too much. Anyways, Jackie Earle Haley, it's a really affected, processed voice, and it's a little bit overpowering, and there's something with the way that he talks where he's kind of slurring, and I thought it was maybe because the prosthetics of the mask maybe aren't allowing his lips to form proper, like, W's or something.
At the same time, he's a severe burn victim, and, like, you can even see, like, he has a hard time moving his face around in the movie. Is that just, I'm a burn victim? That's actually what I was thinking at the time. He's talking like somebody who can't move his face quite well, which is what would happen if your face is a bundle of scar.
I gave that some consideration, and I tried to logic that away in my head, but unlike the Children of Springwood, I just couldn't erase that feeling. I really didn't like it. Even though I kind of thought that Jackie Earle Haley's performance of Freddy was okay, I feel that the vocal performance was lacking something, had too much of another thing, and ultimately was far too quippy.
Which is weird, actually, I think, because, yes, he was talking a whole hell of a lot compared to Robert Englund. Englund had a couple lines that I can remember, period. And while I'd say that Englund is more the crazy psycho, I felt this Freddy was really angry, just like bitter and angry and hateful. And he drew it out just to draw it out, just to make it that much worse for them when anything actually did happen. Whereas Englund's Freddy was more just drawing it out for his own amusement, because he's crazy.
Which would have made more sense if the filmmakers had gone with your idea of Jackie Earle Haley feeling betrayed by the kids, because then all that anger would really be directed towards the kids, whereas Robert Englund's Freddy, the anger was directed towards the parents, and it was all about torturing the children and killing the children so that the parents would suffer. So the psychology of those two characters, the motivations actually works for me, except
they went with the wrong ending.
I do appreciate the differences of the remake, and I actually think, despite the things that I didn't like, the Freddy makeup, which to me, they said it was more like, this is what a burn victim actually looks like, whereas I think he just looks like he should be in a production of Cats.
See, one of those problems is that sometimes we're used to stuff looking fake, that we think that that's what it looks like nowadays. If you ever watch actual videos of injuries and whatnot on the internet, often I will think, wow, that looks fake. Wait a second, no, this is actually real. I'm watching something that's real and it looks fake to me. And that can be one of those design choices that is almost a mistake, but having seen enough specials with burn victims, yes, that is what it looks like. I've seen them try to speak, and it actually is far more realistic, whether or not that is what we expect it to look like.
I don't think I'll ever be able to fully accept Jackie Earle Haley's makeup in this movie.
To each their own.
And that's fair. But like I was saying, despite the things I didn't like, the makeup, the voice, some of the choices in how they told the story, there were things that I did like about the movie, and I do think that this is probably the best of the remakes that we've seen so far.
I felt they did really good trying to just keep the same feeling, the same ideas and all that.
You argued before I saw the remake and before we sat down to record that this movie, in its own way, is still very faithful to the original, and I kind of agree with that. I think it does still more or less have the spirit. The Friday the 13th remake is impressive for the fact that it condenses 4 movies into one, but I think as someone who hasn't seen the first 4 Friday the 13th for probably 20 years,
or who doesn't know that it's 4 movies condensed into one,
it did have kind of an odd pacing and feeling to it. As a fan of the series, that might be cool to be like, oh, that's from Friday the 13th too. Oh, that's where he picks up the mask.
So it becomes more of a remake for the fans as opposed to here's our interpretation of a movie, which is a problematic way of looking at things.
I actually appreciate the differences. I applaud the differences. In some respects, I wish they had gone farther. I wish they had, kind of like Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead. It has the ingredients of the original, but there isn't a single character who is the same character from the original. The callbacks in the Nightmare remake, I felt, were a bit of a detraction because they would do something as simple as the classic iconic scene of Freddy's hand coming up in the bathtub between Nancy's legs, but instead of it being a big set piece, or even a small set piece with Nancy being pulled into the tub and screaming, "Mom, Mom, save me, save me," the whole setup is the same, but the payoff is completely different. The being pulled down into the water gets played out later when Quentin is swimming, and he gets pulled down into the water, and that becomes a whole different sequence. And they did the same thing with Tina and the body bag. They did the same thing with Nancy, I'm your boyfriend now. There were so many callbacks to the original that were taken out of context.
And not played with in any sort of creative way that really felt like anything useful. It was just like, here's a callback.
They were put there in a very obvious way and not necessarily in a clever way. And that made them stand out, and it made it awkward.
Now that I'm thinking about it, it almost feels like you had the producer who's like, no, we need to have this somewhere in the movie. And the director's like, fine. There you go.
It's possible. I actually, I looked for an audio commentary, but my DVD did not have one. I don't know if one exists. I would actually like to hear what some of the filmmakers think. I know I've seen the EPK stuff, and I know they're very proud about, remaking this legendary film. And Jackie Earle Haley is quite happy and impressed with bringing Freddy back to life in this version. But that's EPK stuff.
They're a little biased, you say?
They could be. It's also worth noting that up until the 2010 remake, Robert Englund was the sole thespian that portrayed Freddy Krueger. He originated the character, and he carried the character through many, many years. Television series. You don't see that often. I mean, how many Jasons have there been? How many Michael Myers have there been?
Almost as many as there have been movies.
I think Jackie Earle Haley actually said that one of the challenges, or maybe it was one of the producers, that one of the challenges of making this film was this was not like a faceless automaton killer that you could just
throw the mask on somebody different.
As long as they moved somewhat correctly, we could maybe pull it off. But this was a full-blown, much beloved character. And I think that's where a lot of the hate came from. Is just, I don't even think it's hating the film. I think it's hating Freddy, the new version of Freddy, and just going like, no, this isn't working for me.
It's not exactly what I remember. Screw this noise.
And now we can say Samuel Bayar raped my childhood.
That's the sound of me shaking my head. Anytime anyone says that dumb line is just, I want to slap them. Nothing anyone does from here on for the rest of your life will ever affect your memories of the original anything. There's nothing I can do.
Unless your memories have been erased by your parents.
Touché, sir.
It was a great cast. I liked Thomas Dekker, Rooney Mara, Kellen Lutz, can't remember the name of the actor that played Quentin. Clancy Brown's fantastic. It was kind of neat seeing Connie Britton. And Jackie Earle Haley, honestly, is a good actor. But he brought his Rorschach voice to play, and I don't know.
I kind of feel like this, all this name dropping is sort of a little bit of revenge for me remembering a couple names last time around in Friday the 13th here.
Oh, another thing. Tina's death in the original is such a classic scene. It still kind of freaks me out a little bit seeing this girl rolling around on the walls and the ceiling and having Freddy cutting her and...
Super well done. Lives up.
Super well done. And I mean, we know how it was done, but it doesn't matter. It's still, your suspension of disbelief is intact and you just watch it. They decide to up the ante in the remake, and I believe the character's name is Chris. She gets thrown around the room for like 5 minutes. And it's the same basic idea. It's a little less bloody. It's a little more elaborate, but it just doesn't...
A little more action. A little less... When it was happening slowly with her crawling around in the corners, like, you don't know what's going on, and you can imagine the fear in the boyfriend, whereas here, when she's flying around, he doesn't have time to orient himself and even understand what's happening, let alone let it sort of sink in. And that's one of the big aspects of good horror, is knowing when not to do something, knowing when to just let the feeling sink in, the atmosphere.
Well, I guess I was also talking about the Evil Dead and bringing in like all new characters. For the most part, this movie does bring in all new characters. Nancy's, I think, the only real character, Nancy and her mom and Freddy, that have really carried over from the original, because Chris, Quentin...
Even the way the kids are related, though, like, it's so much different. As opposed to, we all go to school together, it's all, we had gone to school together when we were all little kids. And then everybody went off on their own. So it's not a, we all live on Elm Street sort of deal. It's some sort of past connection that links them together. So you have that opportunity for much more different characters.
It's like they decided the mystery of who or what Freddy is was no longer viable. So they had to create some other sort of mystery to make it mysterious. Because in the first film, it's all about who's this creepy dude in the sweater who's like hunting us down and killing us in our dreams. And then you get the "Mommy, sorry, we killed Freddy" story halfway through the movie. And in this one, they're exploring how is there a picture of me with this person that I haven't met until I started going to high school with him? What is our parents' connection to this or that? Who is this guy who's chasing us in our dreams?
As I said, it's just more and more. Whether or not that's better, sometimes less is more.
They're trying to layer it. They're trying to make it more complicated and more sophisticated, but it just feels like
they tried too hard.
It's like crawling in bed and putting too many blankets on, and you're just hot and uncomfortable. It seems like a good idea, but ultimately you're just sweating between your toes, and it's gross.
Take off the socks, man. Take off the socks. Of all of the ones that we've seen so far, though, this is once again my favorite remake. Not just the original being my favorite of the first three here, and this one is still my favorite remake as well thus far. It is the one that I might actually go back and check out again. I don't think I'll be looking at Friday the 13th or Texas Chainsaw at any point. But this one might be worth revisiting and checking out the rest of the series again and see how it progresses, see how it gets to this point. New Nightmare, for example, is one that I definitely want to see again, since I know I didn't appreciate it as a kid, and it was so popular at the time.
Actually, you're bringing up New Nightmare reminds me of how Craven decided to sort of fold Freddy into kind of a mythological space. And that reminded me of another thing that I actually appreciated about the remake, which was the scene where they were talking about the Pied Piper, because the Pied Piper was screwed over by the people of the town, and he gets his revenge by taking their children. And I was just like, bam, nicely done. And then there wasn't a payoff. But nicely done. And it's been a while since I've seen New Nightmare, but I do think that may have been a callback to a New Nightmare, which, if it's true, is kind of cool, and if it's not, it's still kind of cool.
I certainly have no recollection of that being a callback. I know in New Nightmare he was just supposed to be that's when he was a force of nature. That's when he was sort of an embodiment of evil and a personification. Take that, Mike Myers.
Like you, I would definitely revisit this at some point in the future. As a first viewing, I think it's probably worth... And to be fair, watching these two movies back to back, I didn't have this experience with Friday the 13th or Texas Chainsaw. It almost actually improved the experience watching them back to back. But watching Nightmare back to back, it was just, I don't know, maybe it's because I hold Nightmare 1984 in such high esteem that
you were it was too easy to compare.
Anything that the remake was trying to do, the 2010 version just, the compare and contrast was too strong and it was too in my face. So giving it some distance and revisiting it in the future, I might actually appreciate this movie more.
You just have to watch it completely independently. Maybe forget a little bit more about the original. But I remember, as I said, everybody disliked this movie so much, and my first thought was, why? This movie isn't as bad as everyone says it is.
I do agree with you that this movie is so undeserving of the
vitriol.
That's the only word that can be used. Yeah, like this movie is so hated and reviled. It's just a movie. It's not even a bad movie. It's just not as good as the original.
Get off their back for a second.
And honestly, it fails where it fails. It succeeds where it succeeds. But I wouldn't go so far as saying this movie sucks. If you don't dig old movies, this is maybe the Nightmare that you should watch.
It definitely has way less 80s in it.
I know some people probably would watch the Craven version and just be like, oh, this is too silly, or this isn't cool enough, or how come they're not using CG? And they would definitely get that from Samuel Bayar's version.
It's a movie that I would actually show people and would actually get people to watch if they were like, I want to see a decent, scary movie. It is one that I would bring out. The thing is, I would still probably bring out the original before it, and I think that's the big part that's hurting it. Nobody really cared about the Friday the 13th or Texas ones, but their predecessors weren't quite as good as Nightmare was. Sorry?
So in the final analysis, Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street 1984, excellent film, classic horror, would recommend it to anybody interested in a well-crafted, creepy, supernatural thriller. Nightmare on Elm Street 2010, serviceable film. Would recommend it to somebody who thinks 80s movies look dated.
I'd actually recommend it to a fan of the series, because I think it honors the series, even though the fans didn't apparently like it.
Definitely the best of the remakes so far, but still kind of meh.
But not something I'd bring to a bad movie night.
Oh, no.
I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it far more than I thought I would. And I had less bad things to say about it, certainly after watching it. But Nightmare is a good movie. And I think of the franchises...
Are we talking 84?
I'm talking about the franchise itself.
Just in general?
The whole thing in general. It's probably definitely one of the better long-running horror franchises out there. One of the ones that's probably more worth seeing.
All right, so there you have it. Nightmare on Elm Street fared much better than any of the franchises up till now. Next week, Dustin, what are we talking about?
Halloween, for those of you who weren't paying attention and did not get the clues.
So that is the John Carpenter Halloween and the Rob Zombie Halloween, which I'm sure we'll have plenty to speak on.
I know I do.
And then week 5, as we said previously, will be Dustin and I making some Halloween Netflix picks. If you have any suggestions for horror franchises that you love, or any comments on what we've said on this episode or either of the other Fright Fest episodes, feel free to hit us up on Facebook or on Twitter, where we're at FYC Show. We're on Instagram and all the social medias. Subscribe to us on iTunes. Share with your friends.
Share with your enemies. Share with the internet. Share and share alike.
So be sure to check out the show next week. Thanks for listening. And remember, don't fall asleep. Take care.
Peace. For the last 2 weeks and for the next 3, we'll be looking at old horror franchises, their original...
Sorry, I'm taking pleasure in you struggling.
For the last 2... Stop laughing that I make struggles more.